Happy Wednesday. Happy signing day. First day of signing days, the early signing period. It feels weird because I still don't really know if you're supposed to say happy signing day or happy signing days or happy early signing period. None of that stuff matters because Andrew, Ohio State welcomed in at this point 19 members of their 2024 recruiting class. Still waiting on one, the official letter of intent from Jeremiah Smith. We'll talk about that in a moment. But today was wild, man. Like watching the back and forth that went on inside of the Woody Hayes Athletic Center between Ryan Day and Mark Pantoni while they waited for the Jeremiah Smith decision, while they waited for the Eddrick Smith decision, the phone call that Ryan Day got in the middle of the press conference where he had to run out and basically like confirm with Eddrick Houston that things were good. And from what I understand, I heard that basically flipped from Alabama back to Ohio State like 10 minutes before the announcement was supposed to happen, which was a complete 180 from where Ohio State felt things were on Tuesday night at like 11:30 at night. So like it's been a really, really wild signing day. And if it's a sign of what's to come in this new era where last minute NIL and I hate even saying NIL deals because it's so euphemistic to say that it's like based on anything other than just flat out trying to buy kids off. But that's where the game is heading. And the back and forth bargaining, it was like basically like an eBay bidding account for, like an item on eBay to be like, oh, okay, well, let's wait till 1 second before we hit bid and then see if it's enough. And it's been totally crazy, man. Like I don't know how to feel about it. And we've talked about it over the last year and a half and in jest sometimes about how much we hate what it's done to the game, but like it does take some of the joy out of it. Like I feel personally like exhausted and I'm not actually involved in any of the stuff that had to go on. And I feel personally like wiped out.
Yeah, it's just so much different than it used to be, like you said. And, I'm just trying to keep up with it while I'm at work, checking my phone, texting you relentlessly throughout the day. And I don't know how professionals covering this type of stuff, such as yourself deal with it. I saw the clips of Ryan Day's presser when I got home from work and had a chance to watch it. I don't think I've seen something like that before. I'm glad it was good news and not bad news because I don't know how that would have been had he gotten some unfortunate news in front of all the Ohio State media. But overall, I think things kind of went like we thought, but the path to getting there was a little bit strange, like you said.
Yeah, and it's still strange because here we sit, it's 8:20 on Wednesday night, and the letter of intent from Jeremiah Smith is not yet arrived. And I'm reading the questions here on on YouTube, and someone asked, why make a decision if things aren't done? Why make an announcement if everything's not done? And I think that's actually kind of a fair question, but it's like you're a high school student and you're put into this gymnasium with all of your teammates. And the fact is, Jeremiah Smith has always known he wants to go to Ohio State, and like nothing has really changed, despite the fact that there's been a significant lobbying back and forth between Miami and Ohio State in the last 18 hours on the NIL front. Like over the last couple of days and over the last couple of weeks, there's been all this talk about Florida State and how they were the team but like I've tried to tell people, like Miami's the one to worry about because Miami actually has the money and Florida State doesn't. And so that's become apparent over the last couple of days that Florida State does not have nearly the NIL juice that they have discussed having previously, or what people assumed they had when they started getting commitments from players like Charles Lester and KJ Bolden, who flipped to Georgia today. And Miami's been the one to watch because they are desperate and will go to any length they have to make sure that a player like Jeremiah Smith doesn't leave the state and doesn't leave the Miami area. But he's wanted to leave. He's always wanted to be a Buckeye, and it's been that way since his freshman year in high school. It's been that way 6 months before he committed to Ohio State. It's been that way since he committed to Ohio State. And you can, I think, understand why a kid and his family like is willing to have all of the extra conversations that they probably have had since the announcement today at about 12:15. But from my understanding of it, that debate, most of that conversation is not actually related to Miami. It's related to Ohio State and making sure that when we're talking in this new era, this new NIL space, like, it's not just sign your name on a letter of intent and that's the only legally binding form you have to worry about from now on. Like, there are big conversations happening, and lawyers that need to be involved in things to review like conversations and make sure that people aren't putting themselves in weird spots. We watched, Chase Basantis, the Texas A&M offensive lineman that entered the transfer portal a week ago, is now back, has withdrawn his name from that transfer portal because he's basically just not allowed to leave A&M because the NIL deal that he signed with the Aggies essentially locks him in, and whatever money he would make NIL wise goes to their collective. So like if he left or so, there's this weird stuff going on, and that people are trying to protect themselves on both sides and make sure that everything is set up. Now, that may not make people feel better, but I think it's important to understand that from what I understand from talking to people on the Ohio State side throughout the day since I left the Woody Hayes Athletic Center at 3:30 this afternoon, there hasn't been any concern from Ohio State that it's like all of a sudden Miami is surging again or anything like that. It's just doing due diligence for both sides to make sure that everyone's protected.
Yeah, and I think that's the immediate thought from the fan base is just, oh no, Miami's making a late push or doing whatever. But like you said, there's just so much more that goes into it these days just because of the whole NIL thing. I remember almost a year ago in December, I'm driving home from work and my best friend in the world sends me a text and asks me if I want to hop on a podcast that night randomly. And I'm like, sure, why not? Let's talk. And then I get into this podcast and it was just a ploy to where my best friend told me that Jeremiah Smith was committing to Ohio State. And I was like, oh, and it seems like that was so damn long ago as we sit here today. There were rumors Georgia was pushing Ohio State, Florida, and then Florida State. And now it's like Miami last minute. Did you ever get the sense earlier today leading up to 1:00 or whenever it was that Ohio State had some doubts or like some real fears as far as what was going to happen?
No, I think one of the things that like I personally was worried about, and I told you that when the Jeremiah McClellan flip happened, we'll talk more about that later. But and then there was the buzz about Eddrick Houston and potentially flipping to Alabama. I think Ohio State would have loved it because they knew that Jeremiah McClellan was out at about 8 a.m. this morning. They knew he was going to sign with Oregon, but they didn't know when he was going to announce. And I think they would have loved it if he announced at like 3 p.m., right? So that you didn't have that hanging in the atmosphere over the Jeremiah Smith decision. Now, I don't think there was never really a significant worry for Ohio State. And one of the old adages in recruiting, we talk about all the old adages all the time, but one that still stands relatively firm in its veracity is that there always has to be a second team, right? That's the way it goes. Unless you're recruiting Miles Lockhart, which Ohio State did in this cycle. We'll talk about him later too. But Miami, I mean, we watched the back and forth in the relationship between Jeremiah Smith and Miami over the last 6 months, and how I remember like in June, he's like, I'm never going back there. I'm never stepping foot on the campus again, blah, blah, blah. It's important to realize that this is a kid that is not just a really damn good football player. Like, he is part of a community that has grown up together, playing football together, that all of the fathers, all of the brothers, all of the uncles, they all basically like it is their identity that group stays home, and they, if you can play for the U, then you do. And I think it's actually, and maybe this is just me trying to put lipstick on a pig here because we're still waiting for this letter of intent to get in. I think it actually speaks a whole hell of a lot about Jeremiah Smith as a person, that he has been able to withstand all of this over the last year and do what he wants to do. Because while from everything I've heard from the Columbus area folks, his parents have never like pushed him towards Miami or anywhere else, and they've supported his decision, but it's never been like they were in love with him going to Columbus for college. Right. So I think that there's a number of people that would prefer if he just stayed close to home. In Miami, trying to sell this, rebirth, and obviously a lot of money and everything else. It could have been a very easy decision to make for Jeremiah Smith. And the fact that he stuck to his guns and was insistent on the relationship with Brian Hartline meaning more than anything else, and the development at Ohio State meaning more than anything else, like, even if worst case scenario happens and somehow this goes from him signing with Miami tonight or tomorrow, which I do not think is going to happen, but if it did, like, I think it says a whole heck of a lot about him, the way that he's handled himself. And I've seen people commenting like he's maybe a diva or something like that. I just don't see it. Like, I feel like this kid has been used by national media outlets and recruiting sites this entire year. And I feel terrible for him, because I think it's just garbage the way that he's been manipulated by people into being everyone's, Twitter graphic every single week. And I mean, here I have him on the cover of this episode of Talking Stuff, but like, I took that picture and I'm not like posting it all over the internet saying Jeremiah Smith wants to, it's, I don't know. I feel like it's a really unique situation, but I don't think Ohio State ever was in jeopardy here. I did feel a little personal angst when he showed up at his announcement today and had the black bag under his seat because no one else had one. And you're like, that's kind of interesting, but that's recruiting in this 2023.
Yeah, it is. Teammates, friends, family ties to Miami. So I guess you do got to kind of tip your cap to him to make that decision. And now everybody's just kind of waiting for that official tweet to come through from the Ohio State football account, letting you know that it's a done deal. So we'll see how long we have to wait. And
we'll see. I mean, again, bottom line is, talking to people around Ohio State, this has not been about Miami or anyone else. This is about Ohio State and the Jeremiah Smith family, making sure that everything is set up the way that it needs to be set up for when he arrives on campus. That's what it comes down to. Now, is that going to make anyone feel better? Maybe not. I don't know. But it should, because there isn't still any concern that like things are going to fall apart from the Ohio State side. So that's just where they're, at. So that's that. But things can always change, right? We're in a weird world. Anything could happen at any moment, Andrew. And that's why we love recruiting and have always loved it so much. What about Eddrick Houston today? That was a wild ride, right?
Yeah, that was a weird one. Probably more important than Jeremiah Smith, just given the positional need. That was a strange ride from last night to this morning, and then all the way up to the announcement. So I'm glad it ended the way it did, though, obviously.
Yeah, it's interesting because, again, there was the three guys heading into Wednesday that everyone was sort of worried about and had circled, and it was Eddrick Houston, Jeremiah Smith, and Jeremiah McClellan. At about 1 a.m. last night, I got a message saying everything's fine. All three of these guys are good. They're all good to go. Then this morning, Wednesday morning, I got a message saying, okay, Jeremiah McClellan is probably actually out. He's likely going to Oregon. There was conversations about who he had been reaching out to and getting some last minute advice from like Jamison Williams and Mookie Cooper. And like, he's a St. Louis guy. And so I appreciate him reaching out to fellow St. Louisans.
St. Lunatics.
St. Lunatics. That's the correct term. But he could have also reached out to like Cameron Babb, who played at his high school and never really had the ability to play at Ohio State because of injuries and is still a king in Columbus. And, but if you're looking for a way out, if you're looking for a reason to leave the class, then you reach out to the guys that may be left with a little bit of unhappiness. And that's okay. It's a situation where McClellan, we knew that was coming, but Eddrick Houston, like the conversation on the national side of things started to turn about like 8:30 in the morning. And people that I was talking to in Columbus were like, we haven't heard anything to indicate that this is going south. Then about an hour and a half later, it was like, okay, things are actually starting to feel a little tense, not really sure what's going on. And then everyone went radio silent for 3 hours while things got worked out. And I thought it was interesting. Did you see Eddrick Houston talking after his announcement at Buford High School in Georgia, where he said he had a conversation with Ryan Day about 9 a.m. that sort of answered his questions. And the thing that he talked about was not the rumors about Larry Johnson's retirement, but Ohio State's transfer portal issues and the number of guys are in the portal. So it gives a little insight into what Alabama had been using as a way to drive a wedge between Ohio State and Eddrick Houston, which was to say their culture is falling apart. Everything's going bad there. Coaches are getting fired. Coaches are retiring and all their players are leaving. So it's a pretty like simple approach, I think. But if you can just put a little bit of doubt into a high school kid's mind, like that can go a long way.
Yeah, I think as soon as we found out he was visiting or had visited Clemson and then was visiting Alabama, we just assumed maybe NIL, but also just Larry Johnson retirement rumors. So when he came out and said that about the portal, that kind of caught me off guard a bit. I mean, I haven't seen how many Alabama entrants have entered the portal already. I know they're in the playoffs, so maybe that'll take some time. But I mean, this happens everywhere. It's not just an Ohio State thing. So that's kind of a weird tactic, but props to the kid for seeing through it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that Ryan Day takes a lot of heat from people about his approach sometimes, or the perception that he's like not as aggressive as he needs to be. But I mean, that he's so good as a recruiter and has been since he started at Ohio State that I think sometimes it gets lost because he doesn't get mentioned by a lot of kids in that vein. But he's a closer, and Ryan Day is really good at it. But when Ohio State circles a guy and says this is someone we have to have, and Day is involved, he's still really, really good. And I think it did help that he was up front in the press conference on Wednesday about Larry Johnson's future, making sure. And I mean, the call from Eddrick Houston, which interrupted the press conference at Ohio State, came about 15 minutes after he was talking about Larry Johnson's future. And I mean, it's probably a coincidence, but it's serendipitous nonetheless, because it does at least help answer that question, you know?
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. There was a moment earlier when I thought we were going to get on here and talk about this tonight, and I was going to suggest that the defensive line haul would get like an F-, and I'm glad we don't have to quite go that low. So
yeah, we're still going to grade every position shortly, and I still don't think that even with a 5-star defensive end in Eddrick Houston signing, I mean, it's hard to give that group anything higher than like a D+ in my mind, maybe a C-, because you do have a 5-star. Like, you can't really feel that bad, but like, you had to get 4 defensive linemen in this class and didn't yet. I mean, and that's the thing. This is the early signing period. There is still an opportunity to add to it. So we'll go from there. Jeremiah McClellan, though, I wasn't sure if we were going to like spend a lot of time talking about him specifically on the show, because again, it's bad news and no one likes that. But I really wanted to get this slide on the screen because I thought it was really clever of me as I've made the graphics for the show, and I wanted people to see it. So Jeremiah McClellan says, "Duck you, that's funny. And if you don't think it's funny, I don't care." Again, it's interesting. Like, this is a kid who Oregon was able to recruit as their number 1 receiver, telling him that Ohio State only viewed him as the 3rd guy in their class. And on its face, that's not altogether false, right? But it also doesn't mean that Ohio State didn't really want him, or that he wasn't a priority for Brian Hartline, because he was. But like, you can still end up both things can be true, you know?
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, he's a stud. He's a stud wide receiver. He would be the wide receiver 1 in most signing day classes. So, I mean, that he's a hell of a player. Brian Hartline wanted, for a while there, we said he wanted 4 guys. Then we kind of knocked that number down to 3, and now we're sitting here with 2. Now, granted, those are both 5-star studs, but nice win for Oregon. Last night I was starting to read that they thought they were going to either flip Jeremiah McClellan or that Ryan Pelham kid that was committed to USC, and it looks like they got both of them. So,
yeah. Oregon is going to make the Big Ten very interesting. I mean, that is a program that Ohio State's going to contend with, not just on the recruiting trail, but on the field and in the Big Ten championship games a lot in the next couple of years, I think. But McClellan, again, like, he's a player that you don't want to lose him, because I think that Ohio State, and knowing Brian Hartline the way that I do, and getting to know him over the last 6 years that he's been at Ohio State, like, he really enjoys teaching and developing these kids and turning them into NFL wide receivers. As far as Ohio State goes, you look at like next fall and Saturdays in the fall, the loss of Jeremiah McClellan isn't something that is going to immediately stick out and be like, damn, that sucks. I think it stinks for Brian Hartline because he put a lot of time and effort into this recruitment. But I also think it maybe is a harbinger of things to come, Andrew, in that we've watched Brian Hartline over the last 5 years sign 3 or 4 top 10 receivers every year. And in this new era of college football, which I hate continually saying that, but like, maybe that's not going to be the case. And maybe you have to view it a little differently. He still doesn't want to get into the transfer portal. And even though Ohio State only signed, or at this point has only signed one officially in the class of 2024, the Buckeyes feel pretty good that Emeka Egbuka is going to return for his senior season. If that occurs and you have Emeka Egbuka and Jaden Ballard, and then you have Kojo Antwi and Keon Grays, and then you have Carnell Tate and Brandon Ennis and Noah Rogers and Bryson Rogers and Jeremiah Smith and Mylan Graham, like that's still a pretty damn good group. Like you don't need to panic about it. So it stinks, but it's a loss that, like, I think everyone that follows Ohio State recruiting and has a vested interest in the Buckeyes would have gone into today saying there's three guys that you could lose. Who's the one that you'd be most okay with losing? And that it sucks to put it in those terms because, like, you don't want to lose anyone, but I think everyone would have picked Jeremiah McClellan, right?
Yeah, no, you're 100% right about that. And I mean, and if anybody's freaking out about the wide receiver room right now, obviously we still got to get Jeremiah Smith's letter of intent in, but there's absolutely no reason to worry about that, whether Emeka Egbuka comes back or not, in my opinion. So no concerns on my end.
Yeah, I mean, it changed a little bit when you lose a player like Julian Fleming that you weren't expecting to lose, and so that changed the calculus a touch, but really not that much. And again, if you get Emeka Egbuka back and Jaden Ballard returns, and I think a lot of people had just sort of written off Kojo Antwi and Keon Grays and said, oh, these guys aren't going to play, but they're not walking away. They're not quitting, and they're going to continue to try. And I'm all for that. If you remember, like Paris Campbell and Johnny Dixon and Terry McLaurin, those guys didn't do their thing until their fourth and fifth years at Ohio State. So, like, it's nice that there's actually guys that are willing to put in that time, and I think they should be celebrated for that. Really, as far as today's intrigue, those are the three parts: the Jeremiah Smith, Eddrick Houston, and Jeremiah McClellan, who said, duck you. Come on, that's funny. Like, I'm not, I know that I'm old enough to make a lot of dad jokes, and I'm big into puns, but I was really proud of that duck you thing, you know?
It was okay. Not your best effort, but I give it like a C plus.
Speaking of C pluses, let's grade this class. It is, I talked about this on Snap Judgments on Wednesday with Bill and Austin. Like, it's currently the number 3 class in the country, and I think it seems silly to say that the number 3 class in the country is anything other than an A as a group, but like for what seems like the 45th straight year, it's buoyed by a quarterback, some wide receivers, and defensive backs, and you're missing some key parts in the middle of this team. And I think people who look at the Buckeyes on the field in the last couple of years see that as a problem, and I don't disagree. I think that there's reasons to be like concerned about where things are going in the trenches. I love this offensive line class, probably more than most people. I would have liked to have one more guy in it, and maybe like a big name, but we'll talk about that as we go through. Let's just go position by position. And folks, those of you watching on YouTube, let's put your grades. As Andrew and I go position by position, I'd like your grades for this class. We'll also break down which players are enrolling early from each position group. Okay, is that fair? Sounds fair.
Fair.
Quarterback Aaron Noland, Langston Hughes High School, Fairburn, Georgia, 5-star player. Hard to be anything other than an A. Are we giving A pluses? Because I don't know if I believe in pluses.
We can on some situations, but I agree. Solid A on this one. I am more than happy with him than I would have been with Dylan Raiola. I don't know. That's just my opinion. I'm a big Aaron Nolan guy, so that's an A for me.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where if you look back a year ago, you would be like, oh my gosh, Dylan Raiola decommitted from Ohio State. How are they ever going to recover? And then that's where just trusting in what Ryan Day does with the quarterback position, and even though I think some people maybe have less trust now than they did a year ago because of the way this season went with Kyle McCord and maybe not developing the way people wanted him to, but like the ability to identify and evaluate quarterback traits, Ryan Day is elite at. And so Aaron Noland did not have as good a senior season as he did a junior season, but he lost a lot of talent on his team at Langston Hughes. And that's a big knock in high school. You don't have the ability to just reload every single year like you do in college at Ohio State. The left-handed thing, I don't love, and we talked about that, 8 months ago, but I think when Jeremiah Smith sends his letter of intent, the addition of Aaron Noland is one of the big pieces that doesn't get really talked about with Jeremiah Smith. Those two are very close, and Air's future and Air's upside and Air's talent is one of the things that really drew Jeremiah Smith to Ohio State and kept him in it. So I think that's an A for sure. Let's see. Running back is interesting. Again, Ohio State lost a commitment from Jordan Lyle on Monday night as he flipped to Miami. It is not a surprise. We knew that was coming. We've talked about it before and expected that to occur. Unfortunately for Ohio State, because it occurred so late, you didn't really get a chance to find a replacement for him. If Travion Henderson returns to Ohio State and you have Travion Henderson and Dallin Hayden, and then you have James Peoples and Sam Williams-Dixon, and then walk-ons, that are pretty good. Ohio State always finds good walk-on running backs. Maybe it's not that big a deal. They would like 5 running backs in the room. They're going to go into next year with 4 unless they find one in the portal. Like a guy like Trevor Etienne is probably unlikely if Travion Henderson comes back. So then you'd have to find some good enough running back from around the country who wants to come to Ohio State and be the third back. You know what I mean? So I just don't think that seems realistic. So who are you going to find, Andrew, that's like, what I'd love to do? I'd love to be your third string running back next year. That's seems unlikely.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. And that's why only getting one pure running back in the class. And I know Sam Williams-Dixon could be a running back, could be a receiver, could be a safety. Who the hell knows? But that's why I'm kind of struggling here. I do like James Peoples a lot, but for me, it's probably like a C+ for the position group. Part of that grade, though, is because I think Tony Alford just needs to learn his lesson when it comes to those South Florida guys. And don't let that happen again. 2 years in a row, they've come back to bite you and flipped to Miami last minute. So let's just stop playing that game.
Yeah, 3 of the last 4 when you add in Jalen Knighton and stuff in the 2020 class. So it's definitely a lesson that is being learned. And I think I agree. I would go B- because I really do think James Peoples has J.K. Dobbins type upside when he gets to Columbus and gets into the Ohio State weight program. I like a lot of what Sam Williams-Dixon does. I think he's a guy who's more versatile and can catch the ball to the backfield and provide you another weapon. But we were both on board thinking that Jordan Lyle was the best pure running back, like right now in that group. And so it stinks to lose him at that point. Again, because you could have probably seen that coming and gone ahead and found a backup plan 2 months ago. When all of the buzz about Miami started with Jordan Lyle in October. So that's the problem. James, James Peoples is a bad dude though. I don't think people should write him off. I think there is a part of the fan base that is going to fairly probably stack him up against Jordan Marshall at Michigan for their whole career. And so maybe the grade here changes in a couple years, but not right now. And again, Marshall is a guy that Ohio State just was late on, period. I mean, they tried, they were aggressive once they decided to get involved last November, but they were 5 months late. So we'll see. Wide receiver is a plus as long as the Jeremiah Smith thing comes in tonight. So
that's pretty easy.
That's obvious. You get 2 5-stars and you get the best wide receiver prospect of the last 20 years, 15 years at least, if you go back to Julio Jones and AJ Green. And then you add a player like Mylan Graham, who is like the Chris Olave comparisons are apt, but it's Chris Olave as a junior in college, not Chris Olave as a high school senior, because Chris needed those years to develop, and Mylan is ahead of that curve. He's one of the better route running high school wide receivers I've ever seen. And there's a reason why he blew Brian Hartline away when he camped in June of 2022. Tight end. I've been back and forth because the more I watch Demarion Witten, the more I think he's going to be a superstar at Ohio State. And I don't think anyone really would have thought that back in June, but the kid is just a freak. And that's something that I've heard from 4 different staff members in the last week as we talk about this class. And each of them have used the word freak for Demarion Witten. And he's a player that actually, with the loss of Jeremiah McClellan, could be that third receiver at Ohio State. He's that good as a pass catching athlete. He may not grow to get big enough to be a true tight end. So you could use him in that, 6'3", 220-pound, almost like a Noah Brown type. And Noah Brown was pretty good at Ohio State and is now, in like his 8th year in the NFL. So like, if that's what he ends up being, like, people should be thrilled by that. And Max LeBlanc is, I don't want to say a poor man's Jeremy Ruckert, but he's maybe not quite that polished as a pass catcher, but he's probably a little more physical than Ruckert was coming out of high school. And Jeremy Ruckert was the number 1 ranked tight end in the country and a 5-star player at that position. So it's a pretty good group. I'm going to give it a B+, because I'm not sure that either one of them can get on the field like next year. And that to me would put it into an A.
Yeah, we're in agreement on that. I was going to say B+ too. I like the way they kind of complement one another, and I'm fascinated to see where Demarion Witten's body and growth takes him at the next level. So yeah, B+ is fair for that one.
Who's the tight end at Texas? The kid
starts with a W. Is it Whittington, or is that a different position? No. Somebody say it in the chat. Why can't I think of his name?
Yeah, someone tell me in the chat. The guy at Texas, he's a freaking stud. He's a bad dude, and that is what I think. Yeah, Jatavian Sanders. Thank you,
Sanders. That's what it was.
Matthew Fedorke. Thank you.
That's right.
That is what I see the upside of Demarion Witten being, and that's something where a year ago when Ohio State offered him, I wasn't really sure how he fits in, but then you can see it really come to fruition over the next, I think he can be that type of guy. And now he may not get to be that like physical and that big, but he's got that sort of athleticism. So offensive line, I'm going to give it a B-, and I know that may sound contrary to me saying I really love the class, but I think they needed more than 4, but I really like the 4 they got. And I think that Gabe Van Sickle is a steal this late in the process when Ohio State flips him from Northwestern. And I think you do have, maybe not next year, but I think you have 2 elite potential tackles in Deontay Armstrong and Ian Moore. And I really like Devontae Armstrong, his growth in the last year as well. And both the Armstrong twins are awesome leaders. Like, they're kids that I've seen them compared to the Pouncey twins at Florida. Is that sort of like personality where they sort of loquacious and bring people in around them. Hopefully they bring in better people around them than the Pouncey twins did at Florida, but I think they will, because that's an Ohio State thing. But I know people wanted that big time tackle, that Jordan Seaton, that Brandon Baker. That's just a really hard thing to do. And you look at the Jordan Seaton thing, and the kid made that decision to commit to Colorado 8 days ago, and now he's getting crystal balled to Maryland and is likely going to end up signing with the Terps. So if Ohio State would have been the team to get him 8 days ago, would it have mattered? Probably not. And that's, everyone said it at the time, like, whoever he picks on this first day, it may not even be the team he signs with. So I think it's a really good group. I compare it a lot to last year's group with Austin Sareveld and Luke Montgomery and Josh Padilla and Miles Walker. Those are guys that maybe aren't going to like really move the dial as far as their like NFL upside, but they're 4 really solid college level players. And Ohio State loves Padilla, Sareveld, Montgomery. Miles Walker is still developing and still figuring out how to be an offensive tackle. But I think Ian Moore and Deontay Armstrong are way ahead of where Miles Walker was at this point a year ago. So I think it's actually a pretty good class.
Yeah, I was hovering right around C+, B- there. Again, missing out on the big fish at tackle. Hopefully that changes someday. But I think Van Sickle is a definite upgrade over Mark Nave, and Ian Moore might be the best guy in the class that we don't talk about that much, if that sounds
because he was the first commitment, and no one ever talks about the guy that committed that early. And when exactly. when Ian Moore committed, he was the number 1 ranked tackle in the country according to Rivals.com. He dipped a little bit as other guys grew into the position, probably because of the competition in Indiana compared to what Brandon Baker plays in California or Jordan Seaton played at IMG. But like, that 6'6", 320-pound frame is real. Bill Landis and I both watched him multiple times at Ohio State over the summer, and you come away very impressed by Ian Moore. And the good news for Ohio State is that even if they don't bring in a transfer portal offensive tackle, which I think they're going to try, like they did with Josh Simmons a year ago, you should have an improved Josh Fryer and an improved Josh Simmons. And Simmons was pretty good in my estimation this season for Ohio State, and Fryer ended up being second team All Big Ten, despite the fact that I think he struggled at times. Like you don't need these young tackles to play next year, so they do have some time to develop. So I like that. I like that. Let's see. I'm trying to see if there's any comments that are worth diving into here before we go to the defensive side of the ball, because I don't want to talk about the defensive line recruiting.
I'm with you.
I'm going to give it a C- for the defensive line with Eddrick Houston and Eric Mensah, and it is heavily weighted towards Eddrick Houston signing today, and I could be persuaded that it's a D+, because again, not necessarily that Ohio State is going to be stuck next year in the depth department, because if JT Tuimoloau returns, if Jack Sawyer returns, if Tyreek Williams returns, if Kenyatta Jackson doesn't transfer, and I know people are worried about that, but I don't think they have any reason to be. Like, you're going to get through next year okay. But the fact is, after missing on true edge talents a year ago, to not really make that pop this year, I think is inexcusable. And I know there's still some conversation about Dominic Kirks. Some rumors that Ohio State offered him today. I have not confirmed that because I've been chasing the Jeremiah Smith thing all day and figured it wasn't worth bothering about the Dominic Kirks yet, because Ohio State did not send him a letter of intent, so he couldn't sign today one way or the other. It's going to be a situation where you need more bodies, and so whether that's the transfer portal, whether it's finding a guy like Dominic Kirks, you just have to do more in that spot, and there's just really no excuse to only sign 2 defensive linemen, even if one of them is a 5-star.
Yep, I'm with you. It's a D+ for me. I mean, Eddrick Houston that was today's news of keeping him was just a massive deal. But the depth is going to be a problem here 2025 and beyond, unless they seriously stock up in the next class or add some transfer portal guys or that kind of thing. The Justin Scott flip and missing on Marquise Lightfoot, Dylan Stewart, those, I mean, that hurt. There's no other way to put it. That hurt.
Yeah. And Ryan Day talked about it a little bit on Wednesday, basically when Bill was asking him about if they're doing enough numbers wise on the defensive line recruiting, and if they're being aggressive enough, casting a wide enough net. And Ryan Day's point was, in this new world, again, the new era of college football recruiting, you're basically building a roster year to year. And so maybe you can patch these holes faster than you would have been able to otherwise, but it just feels incredibly risky to keep doing this every single year. And it's not like they're doing it on purpose, but you just have to be willing to pivot to your backup plans faster. And Larry Johnson has just refused to do that. And this year was a prime example of that. They knew in August that Dylan Stewart was out, that Marquise Lightfoot was out. And so where were the other offers to defensive ends? Like, we talked about it on this show multiple times. Like, where are those guys? And I think in some ways they may get very lucky because JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer and those guys may return for next year, that you do mitigate that deficiency a little bit. But man, that's going to catch up to you eventually. And especially in the Big Ten, because the Big Ten is different than like the SEC, where the SEC is year to year scholarships. So you don't have a 4-year window where you're locked in. So like, if you're in the Big Ten and you sign a defensive lineman, like, you're pretty good for a while. Like, you should be able to develop that guy even in this new era, but it's just not good enough, period. Not good enough. Anyway, linebacker, 2 guys, Peyton Pierce, Garrett Stover, really like them both. I'm not sure that anyone's going to look at that and feel like the dial has been completely like moved all the way to 10. So I'm going to give them like a B-, a B, maybe a solid B. They're really good players. Those are 2 kids that are going to play for a long time at Ohio State and be contributors. But I do wonder if you're missing sort of that real twitched up linebacker that you need, as the depth issues at that position will also continue to be a problem. You head into next year, you've got Cody Simon, you've got CJ Hicks. Maybe you move Arvell Reese back there. Maybe you move Sonny Styles down, but like, you shouldn't have to be filling holes on the roster with the roster. That's what recruiting is for. And I just don't know that they did enough there. Obviously they wanted Kingston Viamuasa very badly. He called Ohio State on Tuesday night and said, I really appreciate everything. And I love you guys very much, but I'm going to sign with Notre Dame. And the Buckeyes kept swinging there, but just wasn't enough. And, there is talk about Tackett Curtis and, Caleb Elam's or the linebacker from Cal who visited last weekend. He committed to TCU today. I just don't think that was a personality fit for Ohio State. You already have a Cody Simon type who's a very quiet, reserved guy. Like, I think the Buckeyes need somebody that's a little bit more of a wild card to potentially add into that mix. Tackett Curtis would fit that mix, but he's extremely raw, and I don't know that he's a plug-and-play guy for Ohio State more than, you put him on the field and let him try to knock someone's head off. But how many times can you get called for targeting before your season's pointless,
Right. Yeah, I agree. Solid B was my grade. A couple things I'll add is I would really like it if Ohio State had a coach that's able to go out on the road and recruit linebackers. I feel like that would help out immensely recruiting that position. Not that they've failed or anything at the position, but that would help a lot, especially with a guy like Kingston Viamuasa, although his mom, I think, was a big factor in his decision as well. And I hope they go after Tackett Curtis. Like, I don't care that he didn't look amazing as a true freshman playing in Alex Grinch's defense. I hope they go after that. That was one that Jim Knowles genuinely seemed close to landing, and there's a solid relationship there. So I hope that they do that, especially with the one dude going to TCU. So,
yeah. I mean, Jim Knowles had a sandwich named after him in Manning, Louisiana. Like, there wasn't many places he was eating that many sandwiches. So, I think that it's important that the Buckeyes find someone. They obviously want one in the transfer portal. That's why they hosted Elam's Or last weekend. But they need a guy that's going to come in and be able to contribute, because outside of Cody Simon, who's going to enter 2024 as an established player, everyone else is pretty raw. Even the super talented guys like CJ Hicks, you just don't really know what you've got. And he's heading into his third year without really any experience under his belt. And that makes it feel like you might need a backup plan just in case. Let's see. We're moving on. Peyton Pierce, I love. I mean, I think he's a player that doesn't get talked about enough, similar to like Ian Moore. There's just some guys that just don't get discussed quite enough. At corner, you got three pretty good ones in Aaron Scott, Bryce West, and Miles Lockhart. I'm going to give it a B+, and that's just because I am like a corner snob and I want all three of my corners to look like Aaron Scott, like the length that he has at that 6'1", 185-pound, almost 6'2" long arm type, and the other two with Miles and Bryce, I think, are more slot guys, which is fine because you just lost Jair Brown and Ryan Turner, so like you're replacing like for like. And you have Jermaine Matthews and Calvin Simpson-Hunt and Davison Igbinosun on the outside, but I think that it would have been good to have another outside guy in this class. But I think like the grade of a B+ is not really against any of the players. That's just my own personal preference.
Yeah, I was going to go a solid A on that one. It helps that you got two local guys that are complete studs. Miles Lockhart, props to him for having the quietest recruitment in the history of recruiting, I think. I think he's going to be a hell of a player in the slot or nickel or whatever. I too like those longer corners. I think Ohio State's in a good spot to add one here in the next couple of weeks for the 2025 class. And Tim Walton is a hell of a recruiter.
Yeah, he's done a great job. And like, he's a coach that took a lot of heat from people a year ago. And I think it's a good reminder for people that when you take over a job, you are taking over what was left there for you. And it may take a minute to get things where they need to be. And, there's a reason that Denzel Burke is considering coming back to Ohio State for another year. And it's not because he doesn't think he can get drafted in the first or second round. It's because he wants to keep learning from Tim Walton. And that says a lot about Tim Walton. Let's see. Safety. it's got to be like a C plus, just because you get 2. It's only 2, and you definitely needed 3 in this class for the second straight year. We'll see if they supplement that with somebody from the portal. And these are incomplete grades, obviously, because we're not going to give a full, roster makeover grade until February. But I love Leroy Roker's upside, but you can't ignore the fact that only Iowa and Old Dominion had offered him when Ohio State did. He's obviously a diamond in the rough type of player. Buckeyes compare him favorably to like Malik Hooker. That's pretty good from his athletic side, but like that's a pretty tall order. And then Jalen McClain in New Jersey, who I think can be a really good player, but again, you're going to be looking 2 years down the road at least until he's ready.
Yep, I was going to go C on that. I too like McClain a lot. Roker, good highlight tape and that kind of thing, but seems kind of raw. Not a huge offer sheet. You're just really missing that Von Bell, KJ Bolden type of guy, and they're going to have to really
out.
Yeah, you're in and you're out. I mean, maybe they can get a guy like, who's the Maryland kid for 2025? Delane, is that what it was?
Fahim Delane. Yeah, the 2025 class will be interesting. I mean, the Buckeyes are they're in good position for those guys, but it's a year from now, and you're going to need to sign probably maybe 4 safeties in that class, the way things are shaking out. So if you want to be a safety-driven defense, you have to have elite safeties, and they haven't brought them in that are ready to go. I mean, Sonny Styles is an aberration, and he's a unicorn, but even that, like, he's probably too big to play there. So I think you almost need to move him down. Now you may get Lathan Ransom back for another season, which would be a huge bonus. But you need more guys there, especially because you lose, Kai Stokes, you lose Cam Martinez in the portal. So depth is now an issue. You have Jihad Carter still, but I don't think anyone saw enough out of him this year to feel confident that he's able to step into that role full time. So you need Jaden Bonsu and Malik Hartford to take a big step if you're Ohio State. And again, we're talking about recruiting. Like you should be filling these spots from the recruiting. So
yeah, I love Perry Eliano. I think the jury is very much still out on him as a recruiter, and the 2025 class is going to be very, very important for him.
Yeah, I mean, the Buckeyes brought in Kamari Ramsey, the UCLA transfer, to have an official visit over the weekend. I've been told it's pretty likely he's going to end up at USC. So that one is pretty much out of the picture, and they'll keep looking in the portal to see if someone else pops up. You got to remember, a year ago, Davis and Igbinosin didn't get in the portal till January. This is not by any means like a done process, but it is frustrating because you don't want to have to like keep going later and later and later. Right. Yeah, 2025, you got Trey McNutt, you've got Dorian Brew, you've got Fahim Delane, you've got a really good group. There's the Galveston, Texas, Jonah Williams. Like if Devin Sanchez picks Ohio State on January 6th, and he's 40 minutes north of Jonah Williams and 30 minutes south of Dorian Brew, like you may have that little I-45 or whatever it is corridor sealed off by Ohio State next year, which would be pretty impressive considering A&M and Texas are doing pretty darn good. So that's the class in a nutshell. I said I was going to tell you guys who the early enrollees are, but we didn't. So let's go do that now. Aaron Noland is enrolling early. James Peoples is enrolling early. Sam Williams-Dixon is enrolling early. Jeremiah Smith is enrolling early. Mylan Graham is not enrolling early. Demarion Witten is not enrolling early. Max LeBlanc is not enrolling early. The offensive linemen, Deontay and Devontae Armstrong are. Ian Moore is enrolling early. Gabe Van Sickle is not. On the defensive line, both Eddrick Houston and Eric Mensah are enrolling early. Both linebackers, Garrett Stover and Peyton Pierce, are enrolling early. All 3 cornerbacks, Aaron Scott, Bryce West, and Miles Lockhart, are enrolling early. And Jalen McClain is enrolling early. Leroy Roker is not. So it is, I think, 16 players coming in early for Ohio State.
Wow.
So 15 when you removing Jeremiah McClellan, who was going to. That is the roster is going to look a whole lot different at Ohio State in January, and we will certainly be staying on top of that as things move along because it's going to continue to change. So I'm trying to read something. Court Williams, how's Court Williams coming along? Manny Feze. Like, he's going to play linebacker for Ohio State. You hope he can maybe have like a Justin Hilliard type of resurgence, where a guy that everyone loves and everyone thinks is a a team leader, but just has been bit by the injury bug over and over. So he's going to play linebacker, and I think he can play there. So Parker Seymour wants to know about Morrow Evans, the long snapper. He's a preferred walk-on. He's not under scholarship, so I don't know if he signed anything yet today, or because I haven't seen it. But he's also not on scholarship. So let's see. Coy Parrish, obviously the Minnesota safety that Ohio State was recruiting, he opted to stay with the Gophers. I said it on Sunday, like, there was a number of opportunities that he had to walk away from the Minnesota class that would have been cut and dried and understandable when they lost their defensive coordinator. They lost like two of their best defensive players to USC and Michigan State. And I just think a kid from Esco, Minnesota was like, I don't want to go to Columbus, Ohio. And I think it was just too big for him. And he can go to Minnesota and be an absolute star. He reminds me a lot of Hunter Wohler at Wisconsin, who Ohio State really liked in the class of 2020. Hunter ended up signing with Wisconsin and is now going to the NFL early. So, I mean, he's that type of athlete. So that is where we are. There is still no update. I'm reading text messages. Nothing has gone on yet when it comes to the Jeremiah Smith letter of intent. But again, Ohio State has not been worried and has not viewed this as a Miami issue. But you just don't know what happens. The longer it goes, obviously, the more maybe boisterous and confident Miami gets to try to make some grand final overture. Dominic Kirks, we talked about a little bit. I think Ohio State may have offered today. I don't know. They did not send him a letter of intent, so he couldn't sign with the Buckeyes today, even if he wanted to. He visited in October. There has been minimal conversation with him since. If they decide that they need another defensive lineman, maybe he's the guy that they do it. But I think that the Buckeyes would much prefer he wait to sign until February. Let them watch him play basketball, see what he can do athletically, because his football tape, because of injury, because of moving schools and stuff like that, has been a little shoddy, a little hit and miss. So, Doug Otto, do I like the old style or new style of recruiting? I hate this current world of recruiting, but I think it's really bad for the game of football, and I love the game of college football, and I think this is bad for it. So I think that's great that players are able to make money and get paid. Like, that's obvious, but there has to be rules, man. There has to be rules. Rafles says, any targets in the February signing period? I'm sure there will be, but we're gonna get through this week and figure that out. Ohio State does not generally start to look at backup plans until they need to, and now they're going to know. They don't know what they can go get because they're sort of in roster purgatory because there are so many guys that haven't made their NFL decisions yet. So once they get that figured out, then they'll know more what they need for February. So here's what it is, folks. I apologize that there's no resolution on Jeremiah Smith yet, but again, I think that things will work out. Just stay optimistic and don't freak out. Don't go make a big deal on social media. Like, it's all coming. Okay. All coming. Do I think Ohio State can flip Jordan Seaton? No, I don't think so. Blake Truman, Carter Lowe. That's a class of 2025 offensive tackle from Toledo. I still think the Buckeyes are in a good spot there. But they'd like him to get in the class and help building with Tavian St. Clair. Dominic McKinley, the Texas A&M commit, Dylan G, asking. That one's actually kind of interesting because he's going to wait to sign until February. And if Ohio State is serious about getting more aggressive on the NIL front, which it appears they are based on how things went in the Jeremiah Smith and Eddrick Houston battles in the last 24 hours, maybe they can convince him that going away from home isn't a bad idea, but we'll see. Josh Kassinger, why hasn't the spread changed for the Cotton Bowl? Why are the Buckeyes still an underdog? I think because no one knows what their offense is going to be. Really, even if you go ahead.
I was going to say, I had that same question when they had some of the, guys announced the other day or other week that they were going to play. I thought that line was going to move. And from what I saw, it hasn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at it and like you're still going into the game with the first-time quarterback. You're still almost certainly going to be without Marvin Harrison. You're going to be almost certainly without Cade Stover. You still are going to be without Chip Trainum and Julian Fleming. There's a lot of pieces that are not going to be there. That even if you get a lot of the defensive players back, like the offense is what's going to move the needle. And I don't think that people will be expecting the Buckeyes to look quite as efficient offensively. So look, that is where we're going to wrap this up. I appreciate everybody watching. It's amazing. Over 1,100 people in here, which is awesome. I don't generally beg for things like likes or subscriptions, but if you're in here, like the show. It goes a long way towards YouTube's algorithm and gets us in more people's feeds. So I noticed that no one has done that yet, so that sort of hurts. It's fine. I'm not going to cry about it. So please like the show, subscribe to the podcast channel if you're not already. And we appreciate you spending your Wednesday night with us. If something happens on the Jeremiah Smith front that is unexpected, we will reconvene and discuss it. But I think right now it's just a matter of time for the Buckeyes. So I heard at 5 o'clock, just a matter of time. I heard at 7 o'clock, just a matter of time. I heard at 7:50, should be any minute. So things are just trying to get done. That's it. So again, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for listening. If you're hearing us on your Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever you get your podcasts, it means a lot to us. If we don't talk to you before then, please have a great Christmas. For Andrew Ellis, I'm Jeremy Birmingham. This has been Talking Stuff. We'll see you next time. If I can hit the end stream. It's weird because I'm trying to do that without my eyes,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Bye.